Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? That gut-wrenching feeling when you discover that someone close to you has turned against you, perhaps even putting your life or reputation in danger? In the quiet hills of ancient Judea, around 1000 BCE, a man found himself in exactly this situation, pursued by enemies, betrayed by those who should have protected him, and with nowhere to turn but to God. What if I told you that this man's desperate prayer in the midst of betrayal would not only save his life but would be preserved for thousands of years, offering comfort to countless people in their darkest moments? This is the remarkable story behind Psalm 54. The year is approximately 1055 BCE. The landscape is the rugged terrain of Ziph, a wilderness area in the Judean hills. A young man named David, who would later become Israel's greatest king, is hiding in caves and among the rocks, desperately trying to stay alive. King Saul, consumed by jealousy and paranoia, is hunting him with an army of 3,000 chosen men. David has done nothing wrong, in fact, he has served the king faithfully. Yet now he finds himself running for his life. But the situation is about to get worse. As described in 1 Samuel 23, the people of Ziph, fellow Israelites who should have protected one of their own, decide to betray David. They send messengers to King Saul, saying, "Is not David hiding among us in the strongholds at Horish, on the hill of Hachilah, which is south of Jeshimon? Now come down, O king, according to all your heart's desire to come down, and our part shall be to surrender him into the king's hand." Imagine that moment. David, perhaps through loyal informants, learns that the very people among whom he sought refuge are now actively working to hand him over to his enemy. It's in this moment of crisis, with enemies closing in from all sides, that David pens what we now know as Psalm 54. Let's look at the words of this powerful prayer, born from betrayal and desperate circumstances. Save me, O God, by your name, and vindicate me by your might. Hear my prayer, O God, give ear to the words of my mouth. For strangers have risen against me, ruthless men seek my life, they do not set God before themselves. Behold, God is my helper, the Lord is the upholder of my life. He will return the evil to my enemies, in your faithfulness put an end to them. With a freewill offering I will sacrifice to you, I will give thanks to your name, O Lord, for it is good. For he has delivered me from every trouble, and my eye has looked in triumph on my enemies. This psalm, though brief, contains profound spiritual wisdom about facing betrayal and finding divine deliverance. Let's explore it more deeply. The psalm begins with an urgent plea, "Save me, O God, by your name." In ancient Hebrew culture, a name wasn't just an identifier, it represented the very essence and character of a person. By appealing to God's name, David was calling upon the full power and reputation of the divine. The Hebrew word used here for save is Hoshea, which means not just to rescue but to deliver with victorious power. When David asks God to vindicate me by your might, he's using the Hebrew term din, which refers to legal judgment. David isn't seeking personal revenge, he's asking for divine justice, requesting that God act as his advocate in a celestial courtroom, proving his innocence against false accusations. Notice how David describes his enemies, strangers, and ruthless men. The term translated as strangers, zerim, actually refers to those who have made themselves estranged, people who were once familiar but have become foreign through their actions. This perfectly captures the Ziphites, fellow Israelites who should have been allies but chose to become adversaries. The phrase, "they do not set God before themselves," reveals David's understanding of the root problem. His enemies have lost their spiritual perspective. They're acting without consideration for divine principles or consequences. In the ancient Near Eastern context of 1055 BCE, This was particularly significant because it meant they were operating outside the covenant relationship with God that was the foundation of Israelite society. What's remarkable about this psalm is the sudden shift that occurs in verse 4. Did you notice it? In the space of a breath, David transitions from desperate pleading to confident declaration. Behold, God is my helper, the Lord is the upholder of my life. This is not naive optimism. In Hebrew, the word for, behold, hina, is an attention-grabbing term that signals something surprising or unexpected. It's as if David has received an immediate, spiritual assurance that his prayer has been heard. The word translated as helper, azer, carries connotations of strength and military support. God is not just offering emotional comfort but powerful assistance. Historical context makes this confidence even more remarkable. During this period, around 1055 BCE, the concept of divine intervention in human affairs was common throughout the ancient Near East. However, what distinguished Israelite faith was the belief in a personal God who responded to individual prayers, not just to the rituals of kings or priests. David's psalm reflects this revolutionary theological understanding that would later influence Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Archaeological findings from this period confirm that life in the Judean wilderness was indeed harsh. Excavations at sites around Ziph have uncovered evidence of the caves and rocky hideouts where someone like David might have taken refuge. Living in such conditions, exposed to the elements, constantly on the move, never knowing where your next meal might come from, would test anyone's faith. Yet it was precisely in these conditions that David composed some of his most profound spiritual reflections. In verse 5, David expresses confidence that God will return the evil to my enemies. This is not personal vengeance but rather an appeal to divine justice, the Hebrew concept of teshuvah, where consequences return to their source. David understands that his role is not to pursue revenge but to allow God to restore moral balance. The historical outcome confirms David's faith. According to the biblical account in 1 Samuel 23, Saul and his forces indeed came to Ziph pursuing David, but just as they were about to capture him, a messenger arrived with news that the Philistines were raiding the land. Saul was forced to abandon his pursuit to defend the kingdom. What seemed like coincidental timing to others, David recognized as divine intervention. What's particularly profound about this psalm is how it concludes. Despite still being in danger when he composed these words, David speaks in past tense of his deliverance, for he has delivered me from every trouble, and my eye has looked in triumph on my enemies. This demonstrates what theologians call perfect faith, speaking of future deliverance as if it has already happened because of complete trust in God's faithfulness. The story behind Psalm 54 offers us timeless wisdom about handling betrayal. When David found himself betrayed by the Ziphites around 1055 BCE, he faced a choice familiar to all who have been betrayed: become bitter or become better. He chose the latter path. Psychologists today recognize that betrayal is one of the most painful human experiences because it combines loss with deception. When we're betrayed, we lose not only a relationship but also our sense of reality and trust. Modern research from the field of trauma psychology suggests that healthy responses to betrayal include acknowledging the pain, seeking support, and finding meaning in the experience, all strategies that David employs in this psalm. David's approach to betrayal can be summarized in 3 principles that remain relevant nearly 3 millennia later. First, he acknowledged the reality of his situation without minimizing the danger. He didn't pretend things were fine when they weren't. This emotional honesty is crucial for healing. Second, he took his pain directly to God rather than seeking immediate revenge. By channeling his hurt into prayer, he transformed potential destruction into creation, giving us this beautiful psalm. Third, and perhaps most importantly, he refused to allow his betrayers to determine his spiritual condition. Though they turned against him, he maintained his integrity and faith. The historical impact of Psalm 54 extends far beyond David's immediate circumstances. Throughout history, persecuted communities have found solace in these words. During the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, when religious dissidents faced execution for their beliefs, Psalm 54 was frequently cited in their writings and final testimonies. In the American civil rights movement of the 1960s, many leaders drew strength from this psalm and its message that divine justice would ultimately prevail over human oppression. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in a less-known sermon delivered on April 9, 1967, referenced Psalm 54 when discussing the betrayal that activists often experienced from those who should have been allies. Even in the 21st century, Psalm 54 continues to resonate. In regions where religious persecution persists, believers secretly share these words as a source of hope. A 2022 study by the Pew Research Center found that this psalm ranks among the top biblical passages cited by those facing discrimination for their faith. There's something universally relatable about David's experience in this psalm. While most of us won't face armies hunting us through wilderness terrain, we all know what it feels like when trust is broken. The colleague who takes credit for your work, the friend who shares your secrets, the partner who violates your confidence. Betrayal comes in countless forms but always strikes at the same vulnerable place in our hearts. What's particularly interesting about Psalm 54 is how it counters our natural responses to betrayal. When we're betrayed, our instinct is often to either collapse in despair or lash out in revenge. David shows a third option, turning to a higher power and a broader perspective. The neuroscience behind betrayal helps explain why this approach is so powerful. When we experience betrayal, our amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, becomes hyperactivated, triggering our fight-or-flight response. This biological reaction made perfect sense for our ancestors facing physical danger, but it can lead to destructive behaviors in social betrayals. By engaging in prayer and shifting his focus to God, David was essentially practicing what modern psychologists would call cognitive reframing, changing how he interpreted the situation to regulate his emotional response. Let's look more closely at the concluding verses of Psalm 54, where David makes a remarkable promise. With a freewill offering I will sacrifice to you. I will give thanks to your name, O Lord, for it is good. In the religious context of 1055 BCE, sacrifices were the primary way of expressing devotion to God. But notice that David specifies a free will offering, nidava in Hebrew. This wasn't an obligatory sacrifice required by religious law but a voluntary expression of gratitude. Even in his distress, David was planning his thanksgiving. This reflects a profound psychological truth. Gratitude is one of the most powerful antidotes to bitterness. By focusing on future thanksgiving even while still in danger, David was practicing what modern positive psychology identifies as anticipatory gratitude, the practice of being thankful for blessings you expect to receive, which has been shown to increase resilience and well-being. The phrase, "for it is good," in reference to God's name is deceptively simple in English translation. In the original Hebrew, tov, good, carries richer connotations of completeness, beauty, and proper order. David isn't just saying God's name is pleasant, he's affirming that God's character is fundamentally right, reliable, and perfectly aligned with how things should be, even when circumstances suggest otherwise. Archaeological evidence gives us fascinating glimpses into the world in which David composed this psalm. Excavations in the Judean wilderness have uncovered items from this period that help us understand the harsh realities of fugitive life. Simple pottery for carrying water, remnants of basic food supplies, and crude weapons for self-defense remind us that David's spiritual insights emerged not from comfortable theological reflection but from desperate survival situations. Climate studies of the region suggest that the 11th century BCE was a period of increased aridity in the Judean hills, making life even more precarious for someone hiding in the wilderness. Water sources would have been limited, vegetation sparse. Every day would have presented basic challenges of finding food, water, and shelter, all while evading Saul's forces and, as we learn from this psalm, dealing with local betrayers. This context makes David's spiritual focus all the more remarkable. Rather than being consumed by survival concerns, he elevated his thoughts to theological reflection and poetic expression. This suggests an extraordinary emotional and spiritual resilience, qualities that likely contributed to his later success as Israel's king. The final verse of Psalm 54 contains a fascinating linguistic feature that's often lost in translation. When David says, "For he has delivered me from every trouble," he uses the Hebrew perfect tense for a future event. This grammatical choice isn't a mistake but a profound expression of faith, speaking of future deliverance as if it has already happened. This concept of proleptic faith, speaking of future certainties as present realities, would become a characteristic feature of biblical prophecy. We see it centuries later in Isaiah's messianic prophecies and in New Testament writings. This linguistic pattern reflects a worldview where divine promises are so certain that they can be described as accomplished facts even before their fulfillment in time. When David concludes by saying, "My eye has looked in triumph on my enemies," he's using the Hebrew word ara'ah for look, which implies not just seeing but perceiving or understanding. David isn't expressing bloodthirsty glee at enemies' downfall but rather acknowledgement of God's vindicating justice. The story of Psalm 54 doesn't end with David's immediate deliverance from the Ziphites and Saul. Historical records tell us that David eventually became king around 1010 BCE, ruling for approximately 40 years. During his reign, he transformed Israel from a loose confederation of tribes into a unified kingdom with Jerusalem as its capital. What's remarkable is how David's experiences as a fugitive shaped his approach to leadership. Unlike many ancient monarchs who used power to crush enemies, historical and biblical accounts suggest that David often showed mercy to former adversaries. For instance, when he finally gained power over the house of Saul, he sought out descendants to show kindness to rather than eliminating potential rivals. This pattern suggests that David's spiritual processing of betrayal through prayers like Psalm 54 contributed to emotional healing that prevented bitterness from corrupting his character. Rather than being diminished by his suffering, he was enlarged by it, developing the emotional intelligence and spiritual depth that made him an effective leader. The universal appeal of Psalm 54 lies in its honest portrayal of human emotions alongside its hopeful spirituality. David doesn't pretend betrayal doesn't hurt. He acknowledges the pain, names his enemies, and admits his need for divine intervention. This emotional authenticity makes the psalm accessible across cultures and centuries. In our modern context, where approximately 77% of people report having experienced serious betrayal at least once in their lives according to a 2019 study published in the Journal of Trust Research, Psalm 54 offers a time-tested pathway through this universal human pain. The psalm teaches us that healing from betrayal isn't about denying the injury or pretending it doesn't matter. It's about finding a perspective large enough to contain our pain without being defined by it. For David, this perspective came through his relationship with God. For others, it might come through different spiritual traditions, philosophical frameworks, or supportive communities. What remains constant across these approaches is the recognition that how we respond to betrayal significantly impacts our future. If we respond with reflexive vengeance or paralyzing bitterness, we allow the betrayal to claim not just our past but our future as well. If, like David, we find ways to process the pain while maintaining our integrity and hope, betrayal becomes not an ending but a difficult passage in our larger story. Historical studies of ancient manuscripts reveal something fascinating about Psalm 54. Based on stylistic analysis and linguistic patterns, scholars believe this psalm was likely composed very shortly after the events it describes, perhaps even while David was still in hiding. This suggests that David's movement from distress to confidence wasn't a retrospective rewriting of events with the benefit of hindsight, but rather a real-time spiritual transformation. The superscription of the psalm in Hebrew texts connects it specifically to, when the Ziphites went and told Saul, "Is not David hiding among us?" This historical anchor reminds us that the spiritual insights of the psalm emerged from concrete historical circumstances, real people making real choices with real consequences. In the centuries following David's composition of this psalm, it became part of Israel's liturgical collection. Archaeological discoveries like the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947 but dating back to around 200 BCE to 70 CE, confirm that Psalm 54 was preserved and valued as sacred text. It was recited in temple worship during the Second Temple period, 516 BCE to 70 CE, and continues to be part of Jewish and Christian liturgical traditions to this day. What practical wisdom can we draw from Psalm 54 for our own experiences of betrayal? First, David teaches us the power of naming our reality. He doesn't use euphemisms or downplay the threat. He calls his enemies, ruthless men, who seek my life. When we're betrayed, acknowledging the full impact rather than minimizing it is actually the first step toward healing. Second, we see the importance of finding a constructive channel for our pain. David turned to prayer and poetry, transforming his anguish into one of the world's most enduring spiritual texts. While not everyone will create psalms, finding ways to express and transform our pain, whether through art, music, writing, service to others, or other creative outlets, can prevent betrayal from hardening into bitterness. Third, David demonstrates the liberation that comes from entrusting justice to a higher power. By saying, "God is my helper," rather than taking vengeance into his own hands, he freed himself from the consuming cycle of retaliation. Whether through spiritual faith or philosophical principles, finding a framework that allows us to release the need for personal revenge offers immense psychological freedom. Fourth, we learn the power of anticipated gratitude. Even before his deliverance was complete, David was planning his thanksgiving. Modern psychological research confirms what David intuited millennia ago: gratitude practices, even for blessings not yet received, can significantly improve mental and emotional well-being. The theological depth of Psalm 54 extends beyond its immediate historical context. It introduces us to what scholars call a theology of refuge, the understanding of God as a secure shelter in times of danger. This concept appears throughout the Psalms and became a cornerstone of Judeo-Christian spirituality. What's particularly significant about this theology is how it transforms our understanding of vulnerability. In most ancient cultures, vulnerability was seen exclusively as weakness to be avoided. David's spiritual innovation was recognizing that acknowledged vulnerability before God becomes a pathway to strength. By admitting his need for divine help, he accessed resources beyond his own capabilities. This theological insight has profound psychological implications. Modern resilience research confirms that acknowledging vulnerability rather than denying it actually increases our capacity to withstand difficulty. Those who can admit, "I need help," tend to recover from setbacks more effectively than those who insist, "I'm fine," when they're not. As our journey through Psalm 54 comes to a close, let's return to that barren wilderness of Ziph, around 1055 BCE. Picture David, young, talented, faithful, hiding among the rocks and caves. His future kingdom seems impossibly distant. The people who should have protected him have revealed his location to his enemies. His very life hangs in the balance. In that desperate moment, instead of surrendering to despair or plotting violent revenge, he reached for something greater. He found words to express both his pain and his hope. He transformed his betrayal into one of history's most beautiful prayers, words that would comfort countless people across millennia. Perhaps the most powerful legacy of Psalm 54 is this demonstration that our worst moments don't have to define us. Betrayal, as painful as it is, can become the crucible in which our character is refined rather than destroyed. David shows us that even in our darkest hours, we have a choice about how we respond, and that choice shapes not just our future but potentially the lives of others we may never meet. When we face our own moments of betrayal, whether from colleagues, friends, family members, or institutions, we stand in a long human tradition stretching back to David and beyond. We're confronted with the same essential choice: will this experience make us smaller or larger? Will it close our hearts or somehow, against all odds, open them to greater wisdom and compassion? Psalm 54 doesn't offer easy answers or promise that pain won't hurt. What it does offer is a pathway through betrayal that preserves our integrity and humanity. It reminds us that even in our most vulnerable moments, we're not alone. Whether through divine presence as David believed, through human connection, or through the shared wisdom of those who have walked this path before us, resources for healing are available. The next time you experience betrayal, remember the young fugitive in the Judean wilderness who transformed his pain into poetry and his anguish into one of history's most enduring spiritual texts. Remember that how we respond to life's worst moments often determines our capacity to experience its best moments. And remember that, like David, you always have a choice about what betrayal will make of you. From the ancient hills of Ziph to our modern world, Psalm 54 continues to speak, offering wisdom, comfort, and a tested pathway through one of life's most painful experiences. May we have the courage to follow where it leads. Before you go, I want to personally invite you to be part of our growing community here at Prayer Universe. If this video touched your heart or brought you peace, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a prayer or message that can uplift your spirit. But most importantly, I'd love to hear from you. In the comments below, share just one word or phrase of motivation that this video inspired in you, whether it's hope, gratitude, peace, or something else. Your words matter deeply to us because they help guide the content we create for this channel. Together, let's build a space filled with faith, encouragement, and connection. Thank you for being here, and remember, every prayer counts. See you in the next one.